Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily. I'm Dr. Russell Sharp, your host, and this is the go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. And if we're talking soilless cultivation of today's topic, then it could be considered heresy by many of the people who currently grow this crop. And the crop is grapes, or more specifically, grapes for wine production. And there is a lot of strong opinions, lots of received wisdom, lots of research in grapes, and the idea that you could grow some grapes that were good enough to make wine with hydroponically would be shocking to many people. So we'll go into whether that is potentially possible, and if anyone's done it already, or what would need to be overcome to create that. Then we'll go through all of that today. So, as I say, it would cause a massive stir in the industry if you could grow wine hydroponically. And that's why I wanted to look at it today. So I did some research and basically found that no one's doing this. So it's a untapped market, the hydroponic wine industry. But I think it'd be of interest to a lot of hydroponic growers because a lot of us like to pride ourselves on the quality of the produce we can produce hydroponically, but no one's doing it yet. So there is a number of Reddit users, as always, who have tried it, but no one has actually done it commercially. Obviously, you need to be using the wine variety that is used for wine production and the species. There's only one species used. That's Vitis vinifera, one of my favorite Latin or scientific names. I like to put it along with hops, humulus, lupulus, and ivy, Hedera helix. So Vitis vinifera. It's a bit like Boris Becker. I don't know what the term is for that, where you've got the first name and the second name begins with the same letter, but Vitis vinifera, I like it. Obviously, particularly suited to Mediterranean regions, and there are different varieties that make different types of wines and things like this, but there's potential for producing wine. Now, the good news is because no one's done it already, and it would cause a massive stir. Even if you produced enough grapes for one bottle of wine, and you could produce a bottle of wine that was made hydroponically, you would get so much publicity in numerous articles that it'd be worth the effort. And you might not produce a yield, but it wouldn't be about producing yield. It would be basically to showcase something else. So if you're looking for a topic to run hydroponically, maybe you're a university or a school and you want to collaborate on this, then I'm more than happy to collaborate. And you want to get some publicity for your organization, then cultivation of grapevines would be really interesting. And the reason why it would be particularly contentious is because there's lots of things around the terroir, or what? I don't speak French. Terroir of wine, like the mystical, not really scientific, but like the soil imbues on the vines, and so like at the Loire Valley, the Champagne region, Napa Valley, places like this, where the terroir has an amazing influence on the wine, and you could potentially upend all of that and produce a wine that was grown using either synthetic or organic inputs in a hydroponic system, maybe a deep water system, or aeroponically. Can you imagine that? Where the vines were growing in that sort of system. So that's what I'm thinking of. And then if you said that the wine produced could potentially rival some of these regions, then that would really kick up a stink, and the old heads in the wine industry would steam would be coming out of their ears. Potentially there's a benefit there because you wouldn't need to use a rootstock because there's no root aphids that could potentially attack you if you're growing in DWC. You could keep the pest and disease out, so you wouldn't need to use rootstocks. You potentially wouldn't need to use the horrible copper fungicides they use grapevines. So that's another advantage. You could potentially produce a better wine there. Obviously, it's a perennial crop, and there's your key issue there, is that you would have to be able to grow the vines for many, many years. And so they would need to have balanced nutrition, and they wouldn't produce a harvestable crop for maybe 3 or 4 years. They also require cold dormancy, so you would need to be able to chill them during the winter season, but you potentially could warm them up sooner and get the growing system going earlier on in the year. And if you're in protected grow room or greenhouse, then the flowers wouldn't get damaged in the spring frosts, and that's where a lot of damage and a lot of the cost of growing wine growing wine, growing grapes for wine, is lost in that area there. So there's potential there. You could potentially use robots for pruning the vines. That's a big area where it's lost. And also, if you're not allowing rain to get onto the leaves, then you're reducing things like the spore splash that causes downy mildew and grey mold and powdery mildew and all these sorts of diseases that affect the vines. No requirement for insecticides if you can keep them out. You can optimize the temperature. Obviously, vines love 22 to 28 degrees Celsius, and you could mess around with the light spectrum and things like this to increase the anthocyanins and the pigments in the particular grapes you're growing for. I'd probably go for a white wine rather than a red wine to begin with, just because they seem to be more tolerant of suboptimal conditions. But maybe if you're in a more tropical or Mediterranean region, you might go for a red wine type. I don't know the issues around producing wine, so which one would produce the most wine, but that's something you consider. You wouldn't need to look at the weather when it comes to harvesting as well, so you could harvest whenever you wanted to, when was optimum. And you could potentially look at the benefits, the more sustainable aspect. Obviously, you're using synthetic fertilizers, but lots of vineyards do use synthetic fertilizers, but you could reduce water use by 70-90% if you run a recirculatory system. I don't know how many vines you would need to produce one bottle of wine, but I wouldn't have thought it's too many. You could certainly, a large size grow room could produce enough, I would imagine, to produce a bottle of wine. And even a fairly small greenhouse, you could do it as well. So you could certainly release a press release after you've done it, and you get a lot of attention. Obviously, if you wanted to commercialize it, that's a whole different ball game, and you would really have to have a unique selling point, and people would have to be a want for the product. Maybe you find that you can produce an amazing wine with this technique. There's something about growing them hydroponically. No one's ever tried it before. Well, certainly no one's ever tried it at scale. So there might be a real opportunity there for a particular wine. One of the key things is you're going to need low nitrogen. Once they start to flower and fruit, low nitrogen is going to be key to make sure the fruit aren't in shade, and they get good air circulation and light levels. And then calcium is going to be key as well. So vines love limestone soil or limey soil, and that's because of the calcium content. So making sure you've got a good CalMag in there is going to be absolutely essential. Really high CalMag levels, I would have thought, and low nitrogen levels. Certainly a number of universities and such have looked at studying growing grapes hydroponically to look at not only to see if they can produce grapes hydroponically, but also look at nutrient management, things like this, and to look at the effects of different nutrient deficiencies or toxicities. But I don't think anyone's really taken it to the next level and looked at wine production. I would imagine the EC values are just slightly higher than what we talked about yesterday in basil, and then the heat, airflow, and then that requirement for artificial dormancy in the winter. Vines need some support, so you need to factor that in. So a vine, as the name suggests, just like a tomato vine, would need some sort of trellis or something to grow up. Maybe not as severe as they are outdoors, because you've not got the wind and the storms. So you could get away with twine. They could grow up twine, whereas outdoors they grow on metal wire between wooden posts. You wouldn't have to go to that extremes if you're growing indoors, because they're not getting blasted by really high winds once or twice a year. So I think there's a massive potential there. I think certainly just from a PR perspective, but maybe more. So let me know if you think you can do it, if you'd like to collaborate. If you've already done it but you haven't publicized it, then let me know, and let me know some of your experiences doing that. So as I say, if you'd like to collaborate on something like this, then please get in touch. If you're looking for advice on various inputs, specialist inputs, then let me know. We already supply at Utrema a number of different vineyards around the UK, around England, not the UK, not many in Scotland or Northern Ireland, but certainly in the south of England. We are big when it comes to vines, grapevines and hops. They're particularly good sectors for our products, our specialist inputs. As I say, we hate copper fertilizers at Utrema, and so we make a big deal of trying to remove copper fertilizers from wine production. It's got to be good for soil biology, human biology, and for the wine itself. So yeah, that's been Hydroponics Daily for today, the potential for hydroponic wine. Until tomorrow, thank you very much for listening.